VATUSA's Flight Across America series is brought to you in part by Navigraph. For a chance to win a 3-month free subscription, click on the link below. Terms and conditions apply. Greetings, my name's Rob, and you may know me from a Twitch and YouTube channel called Slant Alpha Adventures. Our captain for the series is Max, who you may know from his YouTube and Twitch channels called Citation Max. On behalf of VATUSA, Max, and myself, welcome to our Flight Across America. This series is taking us through a fairly standard airliner flight within VATUSA. Our captain, Max, is flying us from Denver to Dallas as American 503. In our first episode, we covered selecting an origin and departure, creating a route, filing a flight plan, and obtaining your clearance. In this episode, we'll cover briefing your departure, ramp procedures and pushing and starting. We'll discuss runway selection and taxiing. So for starters, Max is going to take us through the SID, the EPKey 7 departure, to make sure what's on the chart matches what's in the FMC. Max, take it away.
I'm going to do a route verification. So off runway 8, it's heading 083 to intercept the course 106 to Kidding. That's below 10. So anytime you see a line above the number, that means you have to cross that fix at or below 10,000 feet. So Kidding, Piddle, Apu, above 14,000 feet. Now the line's below the number, so that means you need to cross it above. So at or above 14,000. EPKey, same thing, above 15. Posen, and then we're going to go to our transition, which was Doozy. So Posen, Cotton, Doozy, atop of the standard instrument departure, which we've been cleared on. So we're only going up to 23,000 feet, and we need to meet these restrictions. So Kidding below 10, Apu above 14. Very important that climb via, or you've been cleared to climb via the SID. That is meeting these restrictions. Very important.
Now, the EPKey 7 is what's known as a pilot nav SID. In the US, SIDs come in 3 basic varieties: radar vectored, pilot nav, and hybrid. A radar vectored SID, like the O'Hare 8 out of Chicago, contains some basic instructions and usually an altitude to level off at, but notice it does not include a depicted path from the runway to your first en route fix. It's up to the departure controller to get you safely there without interfering with the arrivals. You'll see this phrase, expect radar vectors, so don't just turn toward that first fix on your own without being told to. In a pilot nav SID, like the EPKey 7 out of Denver, note that with one exception, the procedure does depict and describe the path that the pilot should take from the runway to the fix at the end of the procedure. So there's no mention of expecting vectors anywhere on this procedure, at least as long as you're not departing runway 25. In this case, it certainly is appropriate to direct yourself to follow the programmed path. That's what the procedure tells you to do. If you are departing runway 25, this actually becomes a hybrid SID. But I want to take a different example, the Jacoby 4 departure out of Dulles, to show you as a hybrid SID, because there's another important point that I want to cover about radar vectored and hybrid SIDs. A hybrid SID starts as a radar vectored SID, but you get vectored to this initial fix, and then there is a pilot nav path to get you the rest of the way out of the terminal airspace. You still do not turn yourself toward that first point, in this case Riggins, until you're told. But the key point I want to highlight here is what heading you fly off the runway waiting for vectors. Because if you're new to the concept of SIDs and charts, you might assume it's always runway heading, but you can see here that on the hybrid SIDs out of Dulles, it's runway heading if you're departing from the runway 1s, but on any of the 19s or runway 30, it's not. And when you accept an IFR clearance on the Jacoby 4, you're telling ATC that you'll fly the heading that's on the procedure when you leave the runway. One final point, notice here that the initial altitude for this SID out of Dulles is only 3,000 feet. You have to make sure you don't exceed that until you're cleared higher. So make sure you're setting that in your autopilot's altitude selector and not your filed cruise altitude.
Perfect. So at this point here, we got pretty much everything ready to go to keep us prepared for the next stage of this departure, or the departure phase of the flight. We're going to go into the Denver charts, we're going to get the airport information, and we're going to see where we are. So we're at Charlie 30. Again, it should Charlie 30. You can see our gate number right there. And we're going to call ramp control and ask for push.
Let's take a moment to talk about ramp procedures. Most places within VATUSA, any ground surface that's not a runway and not a named taxiway is going to be considered what they call non-movement area. And while that sounds like it means you're not allowed to move in that area, it actually means the opposite. Generally, it means that you as the pilot can move around it however you want because the FAA's ground controller doesn't have authority to control movement there. Let's look at Boston Logan as an example. You'll see pretty much here everything south and west of taxiway Alpha and north of Echo is going to be considered non-movement. In the real world, these ramp areas are generally controlled by employees either of the airport or employees of the airlines that use those gates there. But on VATSIM, it's all basically push and start at pilot's discretion territory. There are a number of airports within VATUSA where you do occasionally see ramp controllers logged onto VATSIM: Atlanta, Kennedy, Dulles, and sometimes here at Denver. In those cases, you'll usually see a message to this effect in the airport's ATIS information or in your pre-departure clearance. In our first episode, we noted that Max's PDC included a frequency to call to push and start, so it's important that you take note of that if you do see it.
We're going to be Bravo November, so we're going to 3095. Okay, perfect. All right, 3095. So we're going to go down here to our radios, 3095, and we're going to have ground control next and ready programmed 12185. So we're staying ahead of the airplane here. Really important. Okay, cool. And we got information mic. Denver ramp, good evening, American 503. We're at Charlie 30 with Mike for push.
503 Denver ramp, sorry for the... Okay, push back to the first lines approved, call me and ready for taxi.
All right, push back to the first lines approved. We will call you ready for taxi, American 503. Thank you.
American 503, could you squawk mode C for me?
Apologies, we'll squawk mode Charlie, American 503.
Whoops, Max just got reminded to set his transponder to mode Charlie, but he's realized he didn't even dial in the squawk code he was assigned. It's still squawking 2000. Remember how I mentioned in the first episode it's important not to close that tab in your pilot client with the PDC message until you're airborne? This is the perfect example as to why, and the good news is Max can now go back and figure out what squawk he was assigned without having to ask the controller.
All right, so again here, guys, that was my mistake. So here, we're not squawking mode Charlie, and we don't have our code in. So for this purpose here, we're going to look at our clearance, and we're squawking 5637. We're going to switch that to squawk mode Charlie, TARA, and now we can see we're squawking mode Charlie. So the air traffic controllers can see us, and we're actually doing what we're meant to be doing. So 5637 is in. That looks really good.
With your transponder in standby mode, you're not sending any identifying information. Controllers can't see who you are. With Mode C active, your transponder is sending identifying information along with your altitude. Sometimes you hear it referred to as Mode C or Mode Charlie, or sometimes they'll say squawk altitude or squawk normal. Those all mean the same thing. In most airliners, usually any mode aside from standby will activate your Mode Charlie. So most commonly, crews will taxi using this mode that's just marked exponder or transponder, and they'll move the selector to TA and RA prior to takeoff. That TA and RA activates the aircraft's TCAS system, which is a system that warns the crew if another aircraft gets too close, and it can even recommend an evasive maneuver if necessary. But for VATSIM purposes, basically any mode that includes Mode Charlie is fine. So you can verify whether or not Mode Charlie is active by looking at your vPilot or xPilot client. And worst case, if you can't figure out what mode to put the transponder in the sim to get it to work, you can just activate it straight from the pilot client.
And we're going to start the engines. We can't do anything right now until we call ramp control, because we stopped at the first line and we've done everything we're meant to do. So we have the taxi diagram up here. So we are waiting for our next instruction. We have georeferencing up here. We're planning runway 8 for departure. We have information Mike. So let's give him a call. Ramp American 503, ready for taxi information Mike.
American 503, thanks for Mike. Runway 8 via Charlie Sierra, hold short of Lima.
Runway 8, Charlie Sierra, hold short of Lima, American 503.
Notice that in today's flight from the very beginning, Max has been prepared to depart via runway 8. SimBrief had it as its suggested runway from the very beginning. Then the ATIS information included runway 8 as a departure runway. His PDC advised him to expect runway 8, and then indeed his ground controller did send him to runway 8. It's important to know, though, that this isn't always so straightforward. What runway you get assigned by a VATSIM controller won't always match what SimBrief recommends. In fact, note that the wind is only one factor which determines what configuration an airport should run in. Traffic levels, and particularly whether there's a bigger push for arrivals or departures at that moment, often plays a significant role in which arrangement the airport needs to use and to maximize that flow and keep up with the demand. So some sim pilots get upset when controllers on VATSIM are using a different runway configuration than that same airport's using in the real world at that time, especially if the result is a minor tailwind on their assigned runway. But the amount and direction of traffic at an airport is usually very vastly different between VATSIM and the real world, so it's not always a fair apples-to-apples comparison.
Parking brake is coming off. Crank is off. Let's go. Sometimes what happens here at Denver is there's airplanes coming in the wrong direction to the other side of the ramp, so just good to be vigilant here. And then
503 short of Lima, contact Denver ground on 121.85, see ya.
Alright, short of Lima, 12185, American 503, see ya. Alright.
Denver ground time is 23.7,
2185. Okay, Charlie Sierra short of Lima. We're gonna give ramp ground call here. Ground, how you doing? American 503, Charlie Sierra short of Lima for taxi.
American 503, Denver ground, good afternoon. Runway 8, taxi via Mike.
I was a little broken there. Just confirm runway 8 via Mike, American 503.
American 503, runway 8, taxi via Mike.
Runway 8 via Mike, American 503.
What Max just did there was super important. Don't ever hesitate to ask ATC to repeat or clarify anything you didn't quite catch the first time. Don't just plow on with your best guess or assume that you can just figure it out as you go. It only takes a controller a few seconds to repeat or clarify an instruction, but it may take far longer for them to sort things out if you tried to guessed incorrectly, and wound up somewhere you weren't expected to be, especially when things are busy. And that goes doubly for when you're in the air as opposed to on the ground.
Runway 8 via Mike.
American 503, contact tower 124.3, have a great flight.
Thanks so much. 1243, American 503. Good day. All right, 243. So, air traffic control told us to contact tower. In this case, if he said to monitor tower, all we would do is just switch to that and wait for tower to call us. It's very important. There's monitor and contact. He told us to contact tower, so once we hold short of runway 8 here at Mike, we will contact the tower. But very, very important distinctions there. You always want to give a little bit of room between the airplane and the hold short bars. We are technically behind the nose, so we're just going to hit there.
Now, Max just talked about the difference between contact and monitor, but there's one other possibility, and that is that the ground controller might not give you that handoff at all. In the US, if you're rolling up on the hold short line at your departure runway, it's generally permissible and often expected that you go ahead and check in with the tower controller. In our next episode, we'll finally get this ship airborne and headed to Dallas. We'll go over the takeoff procedure and communication, and remember that whole EPKI 7 departure we've been discussing? We'll put that whole plan into motion. Thanks for joining us for this flight across America. My name's Rob, and on behalf of Max and of VAT USA, we'll see you next time.